Oi, oi, it's your boy, Mr. Mexico himself, Daniel Zellhuber Gruben's-Führer, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following UFC Riyadh season Noche 306, Noche Riyadh season. And I think I probably had the same experience as most of you watching this card, because I started at the prelims. I watched it Sunday morning, because, I'm not an animal. And as newbies to the podcast will hear from my voice, I live in the UK, so I'm not staying up until 5 a.m. to watch prelims. But I started at the prelims, and I worked my way through, and I watched the whole event that way. Normally, I like to start at the top of the bill, main event, work my way backwards through maybe some finishes, and then I end up watching just terrible women's decisions to end my day, which always end up coming out of these events feeling a bit suicidal. So might have to rearrange my order. But today I wanted to see what they did with the sphere and how they made that work for them. I think I'm going to hold off on criticizing that, because again, it's an experience that you have to be in the room for. I understand that. So, if you paid $3,000 to get a ticket for this fucker, you probably don't want me going, hey, on my screen, it looked shit. Especially because long-time listeners to the podcast know that I like to watch in a small screen so that I can see the feet and the head as much as possible of both fighters while I'm watching. A little analysis tip for you there. But I started at the beginning and I followed it all the way through to the end, and I probably had the same experience as you, which is that Joshua Van versus Edgar Chairez was banger, and I was going, oh, that's pretty bloody good. And then Souza versus Uruguay was great. Bahamondes versus Torres was great. Dumont beat the piss out of Irene Aldana. Rodaldo Rodriguez and Ode Osborne had a crackerjack fight. And then despite two obvious fight of the night contenders before that, Ribovich and Zellhuber, who I was hyped about beforehand, had an amazing fight as well. And I was going, where the hell can we go from here? And then Diego Lopez and Ortega had a decent fight. And then we hit the title fights, and they were not great. They were a little bit underwhelming. I think basically on the boycast, I pretty much called Merab's win. And, well, I mean, we all knew how he'd win the method of. But I think most of the stuff that I figured would happen did happen. And the stuff that we were like, well, if Sean wins, he'll do that. It'll have to happen quickly, and he'll do this, and it just didn't happen. There was some nice surprises to that, but man, that co-main event stunk. But we do have to eat some humble pie. Because you know me, I'm out here every week saying Alexa Grasso is the greatest women's fighter I've ever seen. I love the way that she doesn't really do any damage with her boxing, and then when she gets taken down, she plays a ton of guard, even though she's not very good from there. Above trying to stand up, she prioritizes that. But she was 1-1 with the Lady Goat, or the second Lady Goat, and now she's 1-1. And Valentina Shevchenko can say, I beat that guy once. But we all move on, because it's like she wasn't supposed to lose to Grasso in the first place. And without a nation of millions holding her back, without the Mexicans doing the judging in Las Vegas last time, she got her decision win. She did win every round, to be fair. So let's start with that then. I watched the first fight, or most of the first fight, to prepare for this, and then I remembered that I hated that fight and I hated the subsequent rematch, so I gave up. But what I do remember from that first fight and the second fight is that Alexa Grasso did a good job staying on top of her feet, feinting her way and poking out jabs and things, and gave Shevchenko a very hard time, because Shevchenko likes to hang her lead foot out there, wait for you to kick, pull it back, kick you with that kick that doesn't really do much damage, but everyone always goes, oh my God, she's so fast. Or do a wheel kick occasionally. And then when you come in, she likes to lean back and right hook. But if you're if you're crowding up on her every time and you're just feinting and poking out jabs and not really committing, makes it very hard for her to do that. This time round, she came out and she was countering in combination, which was a great improvement over what she normally does. She's normally one and done with all her counters. Countering in combination, not countering into headlocks, which she does all the time in most of her fights. She leans back, swings the right hook, or leans back and does like a pull left straight counter, and then grabs the head and does a headlock throw. And in the 5th round of the second fight, she gave up her back doing that. And against Tyler Santos, she gave up her back doing that. And against Holly Holm, I think also she gave up her back doing that. Because it's a crap throw. Unless you're a super legit judoka and you land with the elbow in perfect control so that they can't pop out on your back. But she didn't, and she doesn't. So she stopped it. And I went, oh my God, the women's MMA game has evolved. We're in the new era. No head and arm throws. Simple wrestling takedowns, timing shots underneath Grasso's punches. The more the fight went on, Grasso's boxing looked arse too. She was running after Shevchenko. The stuff that had worked in the first two fights was crowding in on Shevchenko, being cautious, poking stuff out there all the time, but never really offering anything up. And this one, she's just like lunging at her by midway through the second round. Which ties in with Irina Aldana because we're going to talk about how awful her footwork was later. But when they hit the mat, this is something that's been a constant in like the three fights between them. Alexa Grasso does a ton of guard play, and it doesn't really achieve anything, because if you don't submit the person, there was no point doing the guard stuff in the first place, unless you get up. There's the holy trinity of guard play, as laid out by BJ Penn years ago. Sweep, submit, stand up. And he presented them like equally valuable options. Obviously, someone coming into MMA for the first time will go, oh my God, I can finish the fight right here. Well, submission, obviously. Why would I do anything else? Then the more you train, you're like, oh, sweeps are banging. To be able to go from the bottom to mount it on someone and then just give them hell for the rest of the round. Fantastic. Doing that every time. And then you realize that MMA is a sport, and those things take so long to do, to set up and time on a resisting, competent opponent. And you're at such a disadvantage. If your skill level is equal and you're on the bottom, they can hit you a lot harder than you can hit them. They're also winning in the eyes of the judges, even if they're not doing damage. Unless you're doing a ton of damage to counteract that, which Grasso was not throwing a lot of elbows. She wasn't doing a lot of anything from the ground except trying to sit up on guillotines. Guillotines from the guard almost never work. Guillotines, you catch them on the way down or on the way up. If the opponent's wrestling up from the bottom, you can catch a guillotine. You are not going to sit up and catch a respectable guillotine. She did actually make Shevchenko do a little roll later on, but she wasn't anywhere close to finishing, and she spent 25 minutes trying to do that. Or throw up arm bars and triangle arm bars. So you realize that doing that stuff takes a lot of time. And time is the most important thing in MMA, because time on the bottom is time losing. Time stuck against the fence is time losing. So you've got to get up and disengage as fast as possible and get back to doing stuff that is at least 50-50. And if you want a great example of someone who was good, like famously good from the guard, realizing that and just giving it up, Nick Diaz versus George St. Pierre. Nick Diaz armbarred a load of dudes from guard, fought George St. Pierre, and he came in with the game plan of when George St. Pierre was in his guard, he would just kick George away or throw his own legs over George's head, like he was going to do like he was giving George St. Pierre a stack pass, and then roll to turtle and stand up and crawl towards the fence and stand up against the fence. And if someone who's got a load of famous submissions from guard and they realize that, it tells you something about it. If you watch probably the best guard in MMA right now, Charles Oliveira, what he does is he throws up a ton of submission attempts, but the moment you posture up to keep away from him or to defend yourself, he rolls over his shoulders and gets back up to his feet, or he puts one hand to the mat and he gets back up to his feet. There were two times in this match where Shevchenko's sitting back on her heels in a very loose triangle, and Grasso's trying to finish it. And you're like, no, kick her away and stand up, or push on her with one hand and get up on the other hand and stand up, or roll back over your shoulders and stand up. Do something. And the really funny thing is that from the first fight and this fight, and I think in the second fight too, basically all the moments that Grasso went from bottom to top were when Shevchenko had already taken her back. So it's like, just turn your back, go to turtle, because if she gets on your back, you still get out, it seems. And then you end up on top. And she did that in this fight as well. So why she wasted so much time playing guard, and playing guard in a way that did not allow her to throw any elbows or anything. If you watch someone like, Tony Ferguson's probably a bad example because everyone just knows he's washed now. It's been so long. Brian Ortega's also a bit washed. But anyone who did damage from their own guard, go watch Michael Bisping versus George St. Pierre. George St. Pierre wants to bury his head in Michael Bisping's chest. He wants to motorboat him. And Michael Bisping stiffens his body, makes his body like a plank, and puts his hands on George St. Pierre's shoulders. So he's pushing him away with his legs and his hands, completely stiff-arming him. And George St. Pierre's driving in, and then he lets him drop. So George St. Pierre drops into him, and he lets him fall onto an elbow and slices him right open. And Brian Ortega did that a load against Tavares. But you see loads of guys just doing loads of overhead elbows. You can put a foot on the hip, turn your body so that you're coming in from the side and throw overhead elbows that way. There are a load of ways that you can start doing stuff to damage the opponent from the bottom and actually make them do things. And Grasso was just trying to, like, she was holding the head, pummeling her feet into butterfly guard, trying to sweep with the butterfly guard and going, oh, I can't lift her. I'll go back to closed guard. And throughout the entire fight, it's just pummel my butterfly hooks in, try, give up, go back to closed guard. And you go, just grab a wrist and try and stand up. Just go to the turtle and try and stand up. Someone holding you down, like in your guard, is hard to deal with, especially closed guard because your legs are sort of shelved over their thighs. But she was playing her guard in a way that was very obviously like trying to look for submissions and things instead of freaking out and trying to get up. And she's done that in 3 fights now. And her success came after Shevchenko passed her guard, started getting to her back, and then she'd escape. Well, just show your back earlier. Just look at someone like Kelvin Gastelum. Turtle, turn away, try and get up. If they get on your back, you're actually pretty good at escaping it. And Shevchenko's not that great at finishing from there. Crazy. And Shevchenko didn't really do any damage from top position. But she was doing well on the feet. It was a bit shite. I think you'll all agree. Even the most diehard... Well, no, actually, they don't... Diehard Shevchenko fans won't have a word said against her. But most people, even Shevchenko fans, will be like, yeah, that wasn't particularly good. I think Grasso did overachieve. She did put together a little run of wins there, but I was constantly waiting for her to just fall apart again because the wrestling has always been a massive weakness. She doesn't really have power in her hands, so she's got this boxing-centric game that she has to try and stay standing for as long as possible to accrue as many points as possible. Not literal points, because that's not how fights are judged, but she's got to try and get as much boxing done as possible without really being able to hurt people and being quite easy to take down. But she did show some interesting flaws in Shevchenko. The looking for wheel kicks just like on her own whims was a great one, like backing Shevchenko towards the fence, and then she did that dumb back kick from a really bad ring position, got her back taken. Got the draw in the second fight by Shevchenko doing a bad head and arm, and respect to Shevchenko, didn't see a single head and arm in this fight. And then she did her dance, and then they did a clip of her dancing with Merab backstage. And I tweeted, this is my 9/11. So that's the bad fight done. Let's talk about the good fights. Josh Van versus Edgar Garez, absolute banger. If you haven't watched this, what are you doing? You're one of the people who came in late, bought $3,000 tickets, and then they didn't put any stuff on the screen until the main card started because they were like, nobody turns up. But that's every UFC show. If you've ever been to a UFC show live, it's about half capacity, or even less for the prelims. And a lot of them are good fights. They got one coming up soon with Aldo on the prelims, and then like a load of light heavyweights on the main card. It's looking crazy. But Aldo and Mario Batista, who's never had a boring fight. But Josh Van versus Edgar Garez, I did a little talk about, well, I released a clip from the Boycast where I was talking about Josh Van last week, saying I really don't like doing this quick turnaround. Didn't say he'd get starched, obviously. And I don't want anyone to think that I'm coming at this like I have the answers. Being a long-term fight fan is about being really conflicted. Because do you remember that time about 5 years ago where Joe Rogan was obsessed with CTE and was asking basically everyone who came on the show about it? That happens. You go through periods of going, oh man, the stats on this are really bad. Basically, every great boxer, the last 10 years of their life has been awful. Not like broke, some of them had money, but just not knowing where they were, not being able to answer basic questions, slurring their speech constantly, shuffling, a shuffling gait was one of the first symptoms that they diagnosed as part of punch drunkenness back in like the 1920s. So I don't like seeing guys jump back in after they've just been knocked out 60 days ago. He took it at short notice as a replacement, and he said he wasn't training, which I hope is true because I wouldn't want him sparring, 50 days out from being knocked out badly. He did take some big shots in this fight. He always takes big shots because he's tiny. I was looking at this thinking well, if he did take the fight at short notice and he wasn't in camp and he only took it a couple of weeks ago. Well, actually, if it was a couple of weeks, he's probably got time to cut down to flyweight, but I was thinking his cut can't be that big. And then you saw the size of Edgar Chairez, and he's massive. Josh Van might be like Seohee Ham and Michelle Waterson-Rodriguez and all those other lasses who were great atomweights and had to fight at strawweight their whole UFC career because the UFC wasn't bringing in an atomweight class. And it's like, you can go and be the best in the world in your own division outside the UFC and make no money. Josh Van as a strawweight, a men's strawweight, or you can come to the UFC and be a flyweight and be too small but still make some money. I thought Chairez fought a blinder in the first round, keeping Van out on the end of his reach, jabbing well, low kicking, calf kicking, and Josh Van really picked it up in round 2. He really found that, like, I've been watching a lot of Golden Era Muay Thai, so I'm going to reference some of that again. Not Wang Chinoy today. I always mention Wang Chinoy because his boxing form is just beautiful. But if you watch some of the old Nak Muay from the Golden Age, when they're all, like, everyone is fighting everyone else and they're all all-time greats. But one of the things that they do a lot is they have to try and walk forward, but anytime the opponent teeps, you want to drop slightly away from that and let it fall just short on your belly. And anytime the opponent low kicks, you want to just withdraw the lead leg just enough that you can step back in basically immediately after their leg's passed your leg. Just after they've missed, you step in so that you can start taking advantage of that. And Josh Van was able to do that in this fight really well. He was able to pull his leg back and then step back in because it's when you're going forwards, trying to put pressure on someone, trying to get yourself in, especially if you're at a range disadvantage and you're trying to get yourself closer to the opponent. Hard to do that if you keep having to stop to go backwards. And this is something that people get in trouble for in MMA all the time. I watch so many guys who are like, I'm going forward and I'm going to corner him and I'm going to mash him. And then the opponent gets towards the fence and the opponent goes, oh, I'll throw some punches to get him off me. And the other guy retreats back into the middle of the cage and lets the guy on the fence off. So Van was doing a really good job of walking forward and then withdrawing the lead leg and coming straight back in. And he was able to use his own calf kick. As Chairez missed, he'd throw his own calf kick and then come in with punches, and that worked really well. And then he started countering Chairez's jab with his own jab, a dipping jab, which was nice, and then with a beautiful inside slip to left hook to the body. And this is the reason that this guy is the analyst's delight. Everyone on Twitter loves him. all the guys who like posting clips of cool stuff happening in fights on Twitter love Josh Van because of the bodywork. And you saw it in Edgar Chairez. As soon as that left hook started sinking into the body, he starts changing his position, starts trying to fight with his right elbow nailed to his ribs, which is very hard to do. The really wild moment in this one, though, was when Van cornered him against the cage. He had him winded with body strikes and he was just pouring it on. And Chairez has got his feet crossed over and he's leaning on the fence with one hand and he's basically halfway into a spin. And it looked like he was going to spin for a back fist. And then Van just comes in and starts battering him. But he stays in that position. And then after about 4 more punches, he spins into the back fist and smacks Van upside the head and almost knocks him out. And it just made me laugh that he was there going, I'm going to back fist him, charging it up for about 30 seconds. But if you want to see someone do something cool like that more regularly in their fights, there was a guy in Bellator years ago called Emmanuel Newton, the big homie. And he got famous for spinning back fisting King Mo out of nowhere. He was getting boxed up and he just turned into a back fist and knocked him out. And then he was looking for them all the time. He had a fight with Joey Beltran where Joey Beltran kept walking him towards the fence. And Manny Newton was strolling around the fence. Like, if you're looking at your opponent and then you keep your head looking at them, but you turn your body to the side and you start walking straight in that direction. He was walking, like taking a stroll around the cage. So his legs kept crossing over, which puts him in position to spin. So eventually Joey Beltran jumped in and he spun into a back fist and knocked him out. It was fantastic. I think Van also did another one of my favorites, which is miss the left hook and then spin into the wheel kick, which I've never seen it knock someone out, but it is always cool to see. It is a bit problematic because the left hook is so much shorter than the wheel kick. There's not really an occasion where they pull their head a couple of inches back from your left hook and then you wheel kick them because we're talking like 3 or 4 feet back from where you're trying to throw your left hook. But I'm going to do my regularly scheduled jizz about double jabs. Both these guys double jabbing. Both of these guys, a lot of their best stuff happened when they double jabbed. Chairez pulled it back in the second round. Was it the second round when he'd been hurt? And he poked out a jab and Van palmed it with his right hand. He poked another jab and Van palmed it with his right hand. He took a little break and then he jabbed again and Van slipped this time because he'd done the same thing twice, so he slipped. And Chairez says, right, I'm having you. And he throws the right hand to where Van slipped his head to and nailed him. Those are the really useful ones that you can use the double jab to draw out. If a guy starts moving his head, whether it's to the outside of your jab or to the inside of your jab, if you can poke out a couple of jabs while you're lining up the right hand and punch either across yourself or like in front of your right shoulder with your right straight, catch them in the lean. Those are the ones that can really cause damage. But a really great fight. Can't rave about that enough. And again, it's the duality of the fight fan here. Didn't like Josh Van taking such a quick turnaround after getting knocked out. Still don't like that. But as a fight fan watching the fights, I'm really glad Josh Van took that fight. So let's go main event. Merab Dvalishvili beats Sean O'Malley for the UFC bantamweight title. Basically doing what Merab does, which is come out, throwing lots of punches and lots of level changes and running the guy towards the fence. And I think the fence was the most important part of this one because he didn't hit an awful lot of takedowns out in space or into space, except the last round where he came off the fence. But a lot of it was pursuing O'Malley around the cage and then running him back onto the cage because O'Malley does those long retreats. He does angle off to land the open side counter and he will circle off eventually, but he's not great as a defensive ring general, I would say, O'Malley. And that's just something that comes with doing those drop-away counters because you're always looking to give ground and let the guy fall forward. You're always running yourself backwards over long distances. Did like that when he came out and he was throwing the right straight to the body over and over in the early going, and Merab immediately countered with a left hook, which was gorgeous, and he got good and close to do it because he's like half the height of O'Malley. And that's funny because we were talking about how Merab has been caught with a couple of big counter left hooks in his fights. I think Aldo stunned him. I think, did Marias? I can't remember if Marias did, but Cejudo did. Just as he's opening up, throwing left, right, he leaves his right hand, leaves his jawline, and then there's no shoulder on that side to get down behind. So the more you open up with your hands, the more of a danger that is, the left hook. That's why it's the king of the counters. I think for the most part, you can't be too mad about O'Malley's work to get up. He's not known as a strong wrestler. But I was whizzing through the fight to try and find... what was I trying to find? Oh, the last takedown. I was whizzing through the fight on like 3 times speed. And it really is like, gets taken down, goes turtle, works his way up. And that happens really quickly, of course, in 3 times speed. But basically the whole round is lost in the process of getting up. Not getting stuck on your back, but being along the fence, working your way to the turtle, up on your hands, coming up that way. So even if you're working the whole time, as we're always saying on this podcast, like time is the big enemy in MMA. It's why I'm so against anyone staying in their guard for a long time if they have the option to try and get up. Second round, O'Malley did spend a long time in his guard because he was out in the open. He got some purchase on some omoplata attempts. He did a flagrant glove grab that got called. Herb Dean was all over the place in this fight. He was like telling Merab the round's over, and then Merab lets go of his front headlock, and Sean gets up and punches him because the round's not over. And then he tells Merab it was his fault. It's just, what? And he was telling off Tim Welch for anti-coaching Merab, because there was a famous clip going around of Tim Thingy telling Aljo, "Go now, go Aljo," and then Aljo runs onto a counter. But then, good fighters don't go when their coach shouts something out. They retain it and then wait for a chance to use it. Because if you say like, "Throw the high kick now," and then the guy immediately throws the high kick, the other guy heard that. I think it was BJ Penn said that he could hear Kenny Florian's corner calling for combinations, and they didn't have their own secret language. They just called for the standard number system: 1, 2, 3. Jab is a 1, cross is a 2, left hook is a 3. Mark Lehman famously makes up new codes for moves for each fighter for each camp, and then has like a worksheet that he makes one copy of and gives a copy to them, which might be overkill, but at least your guy's not going to get anti-coached by Tim Thingy. But yeah, second round, he spent too long on his back, really. If you watch his fight with Jan, I thought he was really good in that fight at just, even when he got put in guard, grabbing a cross grip on the wrist, scissoring his legs into like a scissor sweep position, and then turtling out and standing up. Didn't see a lot of that in this fight. But then a lot of this fight, he was getting taken down along the fence and then building up along the fence. And so there was long periods of this fight where he was just getting kneed in the butt along the fence. But then Merab did almost snatch up a Darce along the fence there, which is something Vicente Luque did in one of his fights in the UFC. If you keep breaking the guy down along the fence and he keeps standing up along the fence, a lot of the time his head comes forward of his hips. So even if you're shorter, like Merab is significantly shorter than Sean O'Malley, you can snap them down into your armpit and start trying to darce them. So 4 rounds of Merab domination, and then the 5th round, the really weird part is that Merab has always got stronger through fights and or rather kept the same pace through fights with his amazing cardio. And then his opponents slow down and they look much worse by the end. O'Malley's best round was the last round. And it came back to that front kick that we were talking about on the Boycast. I talk about it all the time, but it's like, it is such a... We didn't decide on the Boycast. Double-edged sword, is that the correct word? It's more like a sword where the handle is also sword, because if you use it, you're also hurting yourself. But the front kick against a wrestler works really well because it wins them, it takes the air out of them, and that helps over the rounds. And also it's a nice long technique. If they do catch it, they normally catch it after you've landed it, and they normally catch it on the end of it, where you've got some room to move around. It's still more of a Muay Thai scenario than if they grab a single leg, or if you throw a round kick to their leg, like say a kick to the thigh, like no one does anymore. Say you throw a round kick to the thigh, the guy steps in, drapes his hand over it, and then he's basically finishing a double leg. If you get a single leg and the guy swims his leg to the outside, and you pull it up and you run for their other leg and tap it like what's it called, a barzagar, something like that. But you're basically just finishing a double leg. Whereas if you catch a teep on your belly, you're doing the job of trying to sweep off the teep, which is a different type of skill, especially with no wrestling shoes. Because if you watch any wrestling, guys who shoot low singles, guys who pick up just the foot, they really do rely on that boot being there. But the other side of it is if someone's good at parrying the front kick across you, you give up a really bad angle and they can just run in on you. Same with any sort of straight line kick. If you remember, John Jones versus Alex Gustafsson is a great example, because Gustafsson is not an accomplished wrestler, or was not an accomplished wrestler. And he got the first takedown on John Jones in UFC history because John Jones threw a side kick at his knee. He slapped it offline and then he just ducked in, and John Jones was crossed up in a bad position to defend himself. So the example I gave in the Boycast was Dan Hooker versus Mateusz Gamrot, because before that fight I was like, I'd love to see Dan Hooker get to work with the front kicks, but then he does leave himself in danger of getting taken down. And those front kicks, he brought them out from round 1, and he was really taking the air out of Gamrot's sails with them. But also every successful takedown attempt in that fight from Gamrot came off a parried front kick. So it's such... So I'm going to keep saying it, but it's a double-edged sword. But O'Malley got to it in the 5th round, and he clearly hurt Merab. And then he was just chasing after him, throwing more and more. And then he switched to southpaw briefly, and Merab read it beautifully because he slapped the leg and threw the overhand, and then just ran through on the single, finished the round on top. 4-1, easy decision, and now he's the champ. I think the main takeaway from this is, damn, how good is Jose Aldo? Because Jose Aldo kept, what did he keep Merab to, like 0 of 16, 1 of 16 takedowns attempted? And he gassed out in the 2nd round because he was at elevation. And, you know, Jose Aldo's gas tank has always been sort of his weakness. And if he beat Merab there, he'd have got a title shot. And I think it was Aljo was the champion. And that would have been a really interesting fight because, you know, how do you take down Jose Aldo? And if you don't, and you're Aljamain Sterling, you've got to strike with him, you've got problems. However, Jose Aldo's now going to fight Mario Batista, who I'm always raving about, very good bantamweight. But he's doing it in Salt Lake City again. And you're going, why? Why are you accepting fights in Salt Lake City, Jose? At sea level, this dude is still one of the very best fighters in the world in this division. So I think this sets up Merab versus Umar, which is a fun fight. And Merab seems to be really mad about the idea of fighting Umar. So I'm all up for that. And Umar obviously looked fantastic in his last fight against Corey Sandhagen. Sandhagen has immediately said that he wants to fight O'Malley, which would also be a great matchup. We're back to, like, I think people felt a bit deflated because the main and co-main were sort of lay and pray. But the bantamweight division in the UFC is still, any matchup you put together, I will go, damn, that sounds banging. The co-main was Diego Lopez versus Brian Ortega, and Diego Lopez, man, bricks in his hands. And I do worry about Brian Ortega's like longevity now, because he came out and he pumped the double jab, and this is classic double jab going wrong. Who did this the other day? We were literally talking about it last week. Someone like waltzed forward double jabbing, you know, the one where they pump out half a jab and then they pull it back and start throwing another jab, and they're waltzing forward like the opponent's not going to throw anything back, and they get dinged with a counter. That's what happened. Brian Ortega decided to double jab, and Diego Lopez just threw his cross counter across the top, looping right hand across the top. And the replays of this were sensational because the right hand sags Ortega. It turns the lights off, it looks like. He gets hit with the right hand across the top. His legs crumble. He starts falling, and he gets hit with the left hook on the chin as he falls and bounces back up. Like his legs collapse up again. Insane. And to then recover from that, he was never too in the fight. He was getting beaten up most of the time, but his durability is unbelievable. Lopez's boxing looked super sharp. Ortega went southpaw at several points to try and throw him off because he has done that occasionally. He did it against Korean Zombie, and his corner were in fact shouting, just like against Zombie. So he went southpaw, and the moment he threw his left straight, Lopez slipped to the outside, to the elbow side, which is Lopez's right, came back with the right hook to the body and the left hook upstairs. And he did that about 3 times in that round when Ortega went southpaw. And I went, oh, okay, so he was really ready for that. He was prepared. I mean, he has had 2 camps to train for Ortega now, so he probably knows his looks quite well. But I do feel for Ortega because he'd poke out the jab. Lopez would palm it, slip it, whatever, let it fall short. And then Ortega would go, right, he's moving, so I'll double jab. And that would be the one that Lopez decided to stand still and throw a counter, because the counter right hand across the top hit him so many times in this fight. But Diego Lopez is a reminder that, I mean, I'm going to say this, and this is how I trick myself into watching Dana White's Contender Series from time to time, and then I get disappointed. But so many of these fighters in the UFC now, they've got over, I think it's 800 on the roster now. So many of them are just guys brought in through the Contender Series who will fight for the lowest possible fee and are just there to be bodies. But there are still people out there who will absolutely surprise you. Diego Lopez did not come in through the Contender Series. He came in at short notice as a replacement. He was booked to fight in, I think he was booked to fight in LFA. Oh no, he was Fury FC he was booked to fight in. And then he got the call to replace an opponent against Movsar Evloev, who was 16-0 at the time, undefeated in the UFC, obviously, but he'd been like a really hard guy. Kind of like Zhumagulov. Just no one wants to fight them because like they're going to make you look bad. It's not going to be fight of the night by any means. You're not going to get a bonus out of losing, except Diego Lopez did, but Diego Lopez turned up and gave that guy hell. And no one else is really, maybe Arnold Allen, no one else has really given him that much of a hard time. And ever since then, he's been unbeaten, and he's been fighting dudes on short notice as well. You know, he beat Gavin Tucker, Pat Sabatini, Sadiq Youssef, all as planned. And then Brian Ortega, he was training to fight. Brian Ortega pulls out at the very last minute, and they call Dan Ige. So he's fighting Dan Ige, who is a top 10 featherweight out of nowhere. And he just gets on with it. That coming in against Evloev kind of reminds me of Moicano, who is, you know, he's now sort of firmly in the top 20 of lightweight, maybe top 15. He's not top 5 guy anymore, but he came in against Jeremy Stevens, who was already top 10 and a real problem for anyone except the very best guys fighting on their very best behavior. And Moicano made him look like trash. And that's always such a treat when you find someone you've never even heard of. Some randomer from like LFA or Lux Fight or Fury FC, Brave CF, they come in and you go, oh my God, this guy was ready for this and is ready for this step. Kind of contrast with like Raul Rosas, you know, the golden boy of the Contender Series who was fighting in the first fight of the night. I mean, he looked good, but he was supposed to win, and he was supposed to win impressively, and he won sort of ho-humly. And it's just like, you know, I don't want to say hype train derailment, but sort of hype train coming down to reality or having more realistic expectations. On the subject of hype train derailment, I saw a load of people reacting to Yasmin Uruguay losing, be like, oh, hype train derailed. But she was piecing up Ketlin Souza for the first, you know, how long was the fight? 3 minutes. So about minute 50, she was piecing her up. But then Souza, I really enjoyed her composure in this fight because she was eating jabs. She got a fly, like one of those Haggerty-style jumping teeps to the chest. She got kicked in the clam. They both got kicked in the clam. But she was just there getting outsped, beaten to the punch, not landing anything of her own. And she just calmly went forward going, I'm going to get her eventually. And then I think she got caught by a jab. And as Uruguay sat down on the combination, she hit her with a right hand and a left hook, sat her down, jumped straight on her back, and basically pulled her head into the mat, like bounced her off the mat as she got her hand under the jaw for the rear naked choke. I can't recall watching a lot of Souza. Did I watch her fight against Sam Hughes? I might have. Oh, she got knocked out by Denise Gomez in like 20 seconds. I was really impressed with sort of just how composed she was in this fight. And how when she got an opportunity, she just grabbed it with both hands and strangled it. And I enjoy Uruguay. She's, and they changed pronunciation of her name. It's like how Frank Mir was Frank Mir for a while. And he himself was going, I'm Frank Mir, and I'm from wherever he lives. And then he decided he was Mir later on. But she's decent. And on the subject of Contender Series, she came into the UFC against another lass, and neither of them came from the Contender Series. Was it Yasmin Lucindo? Uruguay had won a tournament in Combate Global. Lucindo had done some stuff in other organizations, but they both Uruguay was on a 25 and 25 contract to start, just by not going through the Contender Series, where you do your first 3 fights for like 10 and 10. And how many eyes do you think they get on Yasmin Uruguay? They didn't hesitate to sign her. They weren't like, no, we can't afford that. They just went, okay. Which is why more and more, if you have a good charge in your gym, under your management, consider not putting them through the Contender Series, because so many of these fights, the UFC needs so many fights, and so many of these guys get injured at the last minute. And once people have come in through the Contender Series, they are like entitled to a proper fight. They're not going to give it up to go in at the short notice. So you might as well just take short notice fights if you've got someone decent. Kickstart your run with a better contract. Ignacio Bahamondes versus Manuel Torres was fine. I mean, it was an entertaining fight, but basically Bahamondes clocked that Torres would go southpaw occasionally and then lunge forward with his left hand and just leave himself completely open on the same side afterwards. And Bahamondes, you watched him work it out because he skimmed him with one, and then Torres tried exactly the same thing again and he dropped him. Torres survived that. They held on. They wrestled a bit. They came out of the clinch and Torres went, right, time for my left straight again, and immediately got smoked. Norma Dumont versus Irene Aldana. People are so hot on Dumont now because this was like a star-making performance in many people's eyes, but she landed 3 times as many strikes as she normally does. You know, her previous strikes, I think her fight against Jermaine Durandamy, which was terrible, she landed 11 strikes. But typically, she lands 40 to 50 strikes. She landed 160 almost in this match. And that's not because she's looking so super. That's because Irene Aldana did exactly what she did against Holly Holm. When Holly Holm had that amazing performance that we were all like, oh my God, I didn't know Holly Holm had that in her. It's because she walks forward on a line and she doesn't move her head and she wants to land the left hook. So if you circle to her right, she doesn't really have anything. And if you throw kicks, you just get to chop her legs for free because she doesn't check them and she doesn't have kicks of her own. And she's never going to wrestle. So she just looked awful because Norma Dumont circled to her own left constantly. The few times she had success were when she managed to put a bit of a lead on Dumont and throw her right straight, and then Dumont had to circle back the other way, and that put her in the path of the left hook again, and you're going, okay, now we're cooking with gas. But she immediately then went back to just following and left hooking, right hand an afterthought. But in case you're new and you're coming in because this is a big event and the algorithm found you somehow, the reason her footwork's terrible is because she doesn't know how to cut the ring. When you are the offensive fighter and the opponent is circling the cage, you do not follow them. You try and put a lead on them and step across to confront them. It's like when you're walking down a hallway and someone else is coming the other way. You're about to bump into each other and you both do the side step in sync. And then you go, oh, and then you go the other way and you go, oh no, what are we doing? That's what you're looking for as a ring cutter. You want to confront people. You want to put yourself in front of people. And you want to have stuff to stop them. So you need a wide weapon from your left, which is her left hook, and you need a wide weapon from your right. I mean, people can cut the ring with a good right straight, but if you've got like a big right, a right overhand, a wide right to the body, that was a favorite of Rafael dos Anjos and George Foreman and many other people who were good at cutting the ring. You need weapons from both sides. In MMA, you get the right round kick, which is the best ring cutting weapon. Because if they keep running out to the side, you can ding them in the head with a high kick, or you can just kick them in the guard and then come in swinging with your hands afterwards. You have low kicks, which lift people's legs up and stop them from running so fast. You have spinning kicks for when they go past your lead shoulder, but this wasn't a problem here because Dumont was running from her lead hook. But if you just follow after someone and they keep circling, that's all that's going to happen forever. So Norma Dumont very rarely got along the cage and had to change direction or do anything clever. This is why you never know how good someone's ring cutting or defensive ring craft is until you see them against someone who's good at doing the other thing. Because if you get stuck along the fence against a good ring cutter, the way to get off is you have to go one way, the other way, and then change directions, or you go one way far enough that they start swinging and you either duck under it or change directions so that you can move while they're throwing themselves forward. You have to draw something out of them. So watch Eddie Alvarez when he was in trouble along the fence. Watch Israel Adesanya when he's, at his best. He was good at this. Watch Machida versus Chris Weidman. Or watch, really good boxers who are actually good at it, like Willie Pep. What you can't... Oh, sorry, Dom Cruz is a good example of MMA too, actually. But that's only necessary if the opponent knows how to cut the ring. Norma Dumont basically got to go in one direction for this entire fight because Irene Aldana didn't know how to cut the ring. One of my pet peeves in MMA is people being like, who's got the best boxing in MMA? Because there's so many aspects to boxing. And what they normally mean is, who has the nicest combinations in MMA? Because you can have wicked hands, but if the moment the opponent starts circling, you can't use them, your boxing, generally, is kind of trash. Or at least deeply flawed, because you can't get to them and put your hands on them. If you've got boxing that's only elite when the other guy stands there and acquiesces to let you punch him, you don't really have good boxing. You've got good heavy bag technique. So moan about footwork done. Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Eddie Osborne was fun, but I can't remember a lot of it, so I'm not going to linger too long on that. Except that this was one of those fights where I'm always talking at the moment about like starting fast or starting too fast, because people keep coming out with a big hard low kick and getting knocked out because they don't have the read on their opponent. Eddie Osborne came out and he popped like a half-hearted 1-2, but he grazed Rodriguez's chin. So he tried it again and he dropped him. And then he tried it again, and I think he dropped him again. And you're going, oh my God, Rodriguez, get to work. But it seemed like it just took that to wake him up, because Rodriguez finally sort of got going in the second. The judging was a bit weird on this. Someone gave him all 3 rounds, even though... Oh no, someone gave Rodriguez a 10-8 in the second when he was on top the whole round, but not Ode Osborne a 10-8 in the first for almost knocking Rodriguez out. Which, if damage is more important than position, which it is in the rules, you would think round 1 is a 10-8. I've got no problem with giving round 2 as a 10-8 if you give round 1 as a 10-8. Ribovich versus Zellhuber was banging, mate. Loved this fight. I said on the Boycast that this was the one that I'm looking at as probable banger. And it basically played out like I expected. Zellhuber behind his jab and looking for the lead hook on the counter, and Ribovich throwing combinations into high kicks. What I really liked was Zellhuber using the jab and a whipping lead hook as a lead, or whipping left hook as a lead. When you jab, the opponent brings their hand in to palm it or parry it. They leave their right jawline exposed. So if you can hop in and whip a long left hook around the side, you often don't get very much power on it because your arm's so extended. And you're moving your body forward, not round. You're not standing in place and rotating your hips and shoulders. But you can rattle people a little bit with it. And he did that a few times successfully. Really liked that. Jab, jump in, left hook. But Ribovich made it a fight by just staying in his face. And you saw, I think it was an interesting choice when Zellhuber went back to his corner. Eric Nixick, who I respect a lot as a trainer, but he was like, doesn't matter what the scorecards are you having fun? And I was going, ooh, it's a really close fight, and he's about to lose half his money if he doesn't get to work really well in this last round. And it was a split decision in the end. But yeah, I mean, this is the thing, like, as a coach, your job is to know your fighter. And some fighters do just curl up in a ball if you tell them they're losing. And that's not an indictment on the fighter. I'm not saying they're mentally weak or anything. Muhammad Ali, no one would ever call Muhammad Ali mentally weak. One of the greatest fighters of all time, one of the great hearts and chins of all time. But Angelo Dundee used to flatter him to get him to perform better. He never said like, well, do you remember Angelo Dundee in the corner of Sugar Ray Leonard being like, you're blowing it, son? Because that's what he thought Sugar Ray Leonard needed. Very rarely did he do that with Ali. And there's stories of him coaching Ali and being like, if they were working to land the uppercut or something like that, because he was fighting Frazier coming up, and he didn't think Ali was throwing any uppercuts, he'd go, that uppercut you threw then was beautiful. And Ali would like remember throwing an uppercut he didn't throw and start throwing more uppercuts. So, it is psychology. You have to know your fighter. Maybe if Eric Nixick said to him, you're down 2, which is what a lot of coaches do that if you've had 2 close rounds, they just go, you're down 2. Which in my head, if you game theory it out, you're like, well, then they'll always try hard in the 3rd round. So you're always getting the best result if you just lie and say they've lost 2. But some fighters react really badly to that. And some fighters are at their absolute best when they are just having fun. So, is that the lot? I think I've done the lot. As events go, well, this is the thing. I said I'd talk about the production stuff. I wasn't blown away because I was sat at home watching it on a small screen, and they did kind of look like AI generated films anyway. But people who were there seemed very impressed. I loved the Octagon Girl outfits. I thought that was a really great touch. As someone who's like, what an old fashioned thing, sketchy old men in the front row to be like, oh, you're lovely. Oh, what round is it, love? I never got that shit. Like ring announcers, some people get really hype about it. I think it's hilarious that Nevada has a law where you have to have a licensed ring announcer, and there's basically only the Buffer brothers. They just pick up money in that racket. But I really did enjoy the costumes and things. I thought it was a great touch, and it did remind me like Pride and other organizations did do this a lot, and the UFC has the money to do it without. Maybe they lose 0.5% off their total revenue for events in the year, but they could do cool stuff without it costing much. And the interesting thing about the Sphere is that it's not pyro, it's not things that are being used once. If you book the venue, and if they plan to book the venue multiple times, you can make your templates for your videos, and you've got your specs. Everything's going to be the same every time. You just plug it in and play, I presume. But it should be something where if they do it more, it becomes more cost effective to have a team making these videos and having coming up with themes and storylines for said videos. But even in this event, they only did it for the main card. They didn't do anything special for the prelims. I came into this going, oh, this could be awful. I don't know how they're going to do this because you can't really have it doing anything during the fights. And it turned out they just replaced it with sort of a backdrop and 2 giant screens where they would normally show the replay in a regular stadium. But I think we should encourage this, spending some fucking money on production, putting some pageantry in it. Doesn't need to be every fight night. Can just be every pay-per-view. I would love it to be every pay-per-view. Not even at the Sphere, just putting some effort into the production. And that combined with the UFC saying they want to go on the road more because cities will pay them to go on the road and they don't want to be in the Apex so much, and the Apex being closed for a few months, actually does give me hope that we're sort of stumbling into the right direction. Because anytime you criticize this, someone comes out and says, well, you're just a communist and you hate people making money. But no, there is a certain point where like the line going up detracts from the quality of the product, because there's no reason. If you can get these people as cheap as possible in the cheapest venue possible with no fans, and you get the TV deal and it's set for 4 years, and we don't need any sponsors, so we can just have all the shorts be the same, and that all starts to impact the quality of the product while making you more money. So one day I hope we reach the tipping point where the UFC start to focus on doing cool shit again. And maybe somewhere in there we can talk about how some of this money could have gone to the fighters if we're willing to spend it. Right now, we're happy with the fact that we've got the biggest gate ever and the payouts are the same. Anyway, I'm your boy Jack Slack. I thought that was pretty fun. If you want to see all the extra stuff I do for the Patreon boys, including all my articles, film rooms, bonus podcast every week, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, be a boy. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. 5 more years of Valentina Shevchenko, bless.